NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the biggest space agency in the world today. How NASA was born. Let's get some history lesson today. It's all started in 1955. In July 1955, both the United States and Soviet Union decided to launch artificial satellite to orbit the Earth as part of the International Geophysical Year IGY, which was from July 1, 1957 to December 31, 1958. IGY was the multinational effort to study the Earth and environment. Both the United States and Soviet Union started their space programs separately in different methods as their contribution to the IGY. Soviets operated in secrecy with a single space program that started even before the International Geophysical Year on January 30, 1956. They maintained secrecy to the level even the identity of the chief advisor of their space program, Sergei P. Korolev, was a secret until his death in 1966. On the other hand, space-related research in the United States was led by the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, before NASA, which has been around since 1915 and focused on aeronautical advancements. Besides, there were a few other programs. Army Ballistic Missile Agency, ABMA, led by Wernher von Braun. This group developed rockets for space exploration. RAND Corporation Studies, which was early studies on satellite reconnaissance for defense purpose. But the Eisenhower administration chose Project Vanguard in 1955 for launching an artificial satellite. In Soviet side, Korolev's vision was to launch a large satellite, which could have taken much longer. But the Soviet government pushed him to move ahead with much simpler version to make the launch as soon as possible. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1 as the first artificial satellite to orbit the Earth ever. Sputnik 1 was nothing but a tiny 58-centimeter aluminum sphere, weighed 184 pounds, that carried only a radio transmitter to emit a simple beeping sound that could be heard by amateur radio operators worldwide. The success of the Sputnik 1 launch shocked the world. Another shockwave came along when Sputnik 2 was launched in less than a month on November 3, 1957, carrying a dog, Laika, the first living creature to orbit the Earth. But unfortunately, Laika died within few hours of launch due to overheating of the cabin and panic attack. Russian scientists admitted Laika's death in the year 2002. Despite Laika's death, the launch of both Sputnik 1 and Sputnik 2 was successful. United States felt the need to accelerate their space program and science education after that. US also needed to unify all the efforts of space exploration for greater strength and set a clear mission. Right after the Sputnik 2 launch on November 21, 1957, President Eisenhower established the President's Scientific Advisory Committee, PSAC. While the PSAC was working on their report, the American Vanguard project, which was led by the National Academy of Science, pushed forward their satellite launch on December 6, 1957. They scheduled the launch in front of the world press, unlike the Soviet launch. It was a tiny 3-pound satellite with a carrier of 3-stage rocket developed by the Naval Research Laboratory. The rocket could only rise about 4 feet up in the air, then the main engine lost thrust and it crashed back onto the ground with an explosion, though the engineers were able to recover the satellite. Because it was such a public event and the failure happened in front of the whole world, it became a serious necessity to accelerate the space program for US. The President's Scientific Advisory Committee, PSAC, submitted a report in February 1958 with a recommendation to establish a civilian space agency absorbing some of the existing space program, primarily around NACA. On November 25, Senate Majority Leader Lyndon B. Johnson started a 6-week hearings on the matter that was initially perceived as a missile gap between the two superpowers. The hearing included 73 expert witnesses, more than 1,300 pages of testimony, transformed the view of the Senate from a battle of missiles to a scientific and commercial potential that can be used for rural and agricultural development. Legislative Reference Service analyst Eileen Galloway summarized the results of the hearings like this. We changed the perception of the problem from one that was originally was national defense to one that also had beneficial uses from space and meant that we could hope for peace. While the legislative process was going on, the scientific endeavor to a successful rocket launch was also going on. This time, Army Ballistic Missile Agency (AMBA) resurrected their Jupiter C rocket program. AMBA, along with California Institute of Technology's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, developed Explorer-1 rocket in only 84 days, modifying the existing Jupiter C rocket. The rocket that Vanguard program launched was a 3-stage rocket, and this new rocket was a 4-stage rocket, which was also called a Juno rocket. They successfully launched Explorer-1 using this Juno rocket from Florida's Cape Canaveral Pad 26 on January 31, 1958. The Explorer-1 was 30 pounds, carrying 18 pounds of scientific instruments. Getting back to the legislative portion of the story, on April 2, 1958, President Eisenhower called for the creation of National Aeronautics and Space Agency (NASA) based on the existing Space Research Program (NACA) as recommended by the PSAC. By the time both the Senate and Congress were working on the NASA bill, Soviets launched Sputnik 3, which was almost 3,000 pounds, much bigger than their previous attempts and obviously much bigger than the first rocket of the United States. This satellite was Korolev's initial vision. The successful launch of Sputnik 3 was a further push to the US space program. Finally, US Congress passed the bill on June 2nd. Senate passed this bipartisan bill on June 16, and President Eisenhower signed it into law on July 29. NASA officially started its journey on October 1st, 1958. I hope the video was interesting for you. Please subscribe to stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching.